standing in my childhood kitchen listening to my mother tell our entire family that I was a complete disappointment who would never amount to anything. I felt my world crumble. 28 years old, and she was announcing my failures like breaking news. My cousins snickered, my aunts whispered, and my grandmother just shook her head in shame. But what happened next would change everything forever and expose the shocking truth that had been hidden for months. Before we dive into this incredible family revenge story, tell me where you're watching from, hit that like button if you've ever felt underestimated by family, and subscribe because this story has more twists than a soap opera. Trust me, you won't want to miss what happens when the truth finally comes out. My name is Sarah Mitchell, and I have always been the black sheep of the Mitchell family. Growing up in suburban Ohio, I was constantly compared to my perfect older sister, Rebecca, who became a lawyer, married a doctor, and produced two adorable children right on schedule. Meanwhile, I moved to New York City after college, pursuing what my mother called pipe dreams in the corporate world. For the past 3 years, I had been working at Morrison and Associates, one of the most prestigious consulting firms in Manhattan. What my family did not know was that I had climbed from an entry-level analyst to senior project manager, overseeing multi-million-dollar accounts and leading a team of 12 professionals. My salary had grown to 6 figures, and I had just purchased a beautiful apartment in Brooklyn Heights. But every time I tried to share these achievements during our monthly family calls, my mother would cut me off with dismissive comments about how real success meant marriage and children, not playing office. The situation reached its breaking point during Thanksgiving last year. I had flown home to Ohio, excited to finally tell everyone about my recent promotion to Director of Strategic Development. The moment I walked through the door, my mother grabbed my phone and started scrolling through my social media. "Look at this," she announced to the room full of relatives. "Sarah posts pictures of fancy restaurants and expensive clothes, but she never talks about her actual job. You know what that means." She paused dramatically. "She's probably unemployed and living off credit cards trying to fake a lifestyle she cannot afford." My cousin David laughed. "I knew something was fishy. No real job pays enough for someone our age to live like that in New York." "Sarah always was the dreamer," my Aunt Patricia chimed in. "Remember when she thought she could be a writer? Now she's probably waiting tables and calling it consulting." I tried to defend myself, but my mother held up her hand. "Honey, we love you, but it is time to face reality. Come home, find a nice local boy, and settle down. This fantasy life in New York needs to end." That Thanksgiving dinner became a nightmare of judgment and assumptions. Every family member had their theory about my fake success. My uncle suggested I was probably involved in something illegal. My grandmother worried I had become one of those city girls who sold their souls for material possessions. Even my sister Rebecca, who I thought would defend me, simply said, "Sarah, if you were really doing well, you would not be so secretive about your job." The worst part was that they were not entirely wrong about my secretiveness. Morrison and Associates required all employees to sign strict confidentiality agreements about our clients and projects. We worked with Fortune 500 companies on sensitive restructuring deals, mergers, and strategic pivots that could affect stock prices if leaked. I could not casually mention that I was helping a major tech company navigate a hostile takeover or that I had just saved a pharmaceutical giant $50 million through operational efficiency improvements. But my family interpreted this discretion as deception. They decided I was ashamed of my real job because it was embarrassing. The narrative grew stronger with each family gathering. By Christmas, they were convinced I was probably working at a restaurant or retail store using filters and clever photography to create an illusion of success on social media. My mother started what she called intervention conversations. She would call me weekly, sometimes daily, urging me to stop pretending and come home. She created a whole storyline about how I was struggling with debt, probably depressed, and too proud to ask for help. She even researched entry-level jobs in our hometown, and would email me listings for administrative assistant positions and retail management roles. "Sarah, I found a nice opportunity at the bank downtown," she would say during our calls. "They offer health insurance and 2 weeks of vacation. It's honest work, and you could move back into your old room until you get back on your feet." The gaslighting became relentless. She convinced other family members to join her campaign. I would receive texts from cousins asking if I needed money. My grandmother sent me care packages filled with generic resume templates and self-help books about overcoming failure and finding your true calling. What hurt the most was how they discussed me when they thought I could not hear. During family video calls, they would mute my line and have whole conversations about my situation. I learned this when my tech-savvy younger cousin forgot to mute properly, and I heard my mother saying, "Poor Sarah, she's living in complete denial. We need to stage some kind of intervention before she hits rock bottom." They created a family group chat without me, which I discovered when my sister accidentally sent a screenshot that included the chat name, Sarah Situation Support. In that chat, they were coordinating their help strategy, sharing job listings, and discussing how to gently confront me about my obvious lies. The financial assumptions were particularly insulting. They calculated my supposed expenses based on my social media posts and concluded I must be drowning in debt. My mother started researching bankruptcy procedures and debt consolidation programs, convinced she would need to help me navigate financial ruin when my house of cards finally collapsed. My boss, James Richardson, had no idea about any of this family drama. At work, I was known as the rising star who never missed a deadline, consistently exceeded client expectations, and had just landed our biggest account of the year. James had been mentoring me for promotion to vice president, a role that would make me the youngest VP in company history. But the constant pressure from my family was affecting my performance. I started declining client dinners because I could not post about them without triggering more concern from relatives. I avoided company events that might show up on LinkedIn, worried about how my family would misinterpret them. I was literally hiding my success to avoid more accusations of lying about my success. The irony was suffocating. The more successful I became, the more convinced my family was that I was failing. They had created such a strong narrative about my deception that contradictory evidence only strengthened their beliefs. When I posted a picture from a company retreat in the Hamptons, they decided it proved I was desperately trying to keep up appearances. When I mentioned working late nights on important projects, they assumed I was covering shifts at some service job I was ashamed to name. This toxic cycle continued for months, building toward the confrontation that would change everything. My mother had been planning what she called a family intervention for Easter Sunday, convinced that public embarrassment and unified family pressure would finally force me to tell the truth about my failures and accept their help to get my life back on track. She had no idea that the truth would be far more shocking than any lie she had imagined. Easter Sunday arrived with the promise of spring renewal, but my mother had planned something far from celebratory. She had orchestrated what she called a loving intervention to save me from my supposed delusions of success. The entire extended family gathered at our family home in suburban Cleveland. Aunts, uncles, cousins, grandparents, and even family friends who barely knew me but felt qualified to offer opinions about my life choices. I walked into the living room to find them arranged in a circle like some twisted support group. My mother stood at the center holding a manila folder that she announced contained evidence of my deception. The atmosphere was heavy with predetermined judgment and misplaced concern. "Everyone please take a seat," my mother began, her voice carrying the authority of a prosecutor addressing a jury. "We are here today because we love Sarah, and love means holding people accountable for their actions. For too long, we have enabled her fantasy lifestyle by not addressing the obvious signs that she is struggling and lying about her circumstances." My cousin Jennifer, who worked as a high school guidance counselor, had apparently been designated as the intervention specialist. She pulled out a notebook and began reading from what she called her observation log. "Sarah, over the past year, we have documented several concerning patterns," Jennifer announced. You post pictures from expensive restaurants but never mention having dinner with coworkers or clients. You show expensive clothes but never discuss shopping trips or specific purchases. You live in an expensive neighborhood but avoid video calls from your apartment. These are classic signs of someone maintaining false appearances through credit card debt or other deceptive means. My Uncle Robert, who sold insurance in our small town, stood up with a printed stack of papers. I took the liberty of researching average salaries for consulting jobs in New York. According to my findings, entry-level positions pay between $30,000 and $40,000 annually. After taxes and living expenses in Manhattan, that leaves virtually nothing for the lifestyle you claim to maintain. But I never said I was entry-level, I protested. I told you I was promoted multiple times. My Aunt Patricia shook her head sympathetically. Honey, that is exactly what someone would say if they were too proud to admit they were struggling. We understand. New York is expensive, and sometimes people get caught up in trying to look successful instead of actually being successful. My grandmother, who had been silent until now, spoke with the weight of her 87 years. Sarah, dear, I lived through the Great Depression. I know what it looks like when people pretend to have more than they do. The shame of financial struggle can make people do desperate things, including lying to family who only wants to help. The intervention continued with each family member presenting their evidence of my deception. They had analyzed my social media posts with forensic precision, looking for inconsistencies and signs of financial distress. They had researched New York cost of living and decided my lifestyle was mathematically impossible on what they assumed was my salary. My mother opened her manila folder and began reading from what she called her fact sheet. She had documented every expensive meal, every nice outfit, every indication of financial comfort I had shared over the past year. She had calculated estimated costs and compared them to her assumed version of my income, building a case that proved in her mind that I was living far beyond my means. The evidence is overwhelming, she concluded. Sarah is clearly struggling financially, but too proud to admit it. She has created an elaborate fiction about her career success to avoid facing reality. This behavior is not healthy for her or fair to family members who are genuinely concerned about her well-being. The room nodded in agreement. They had convinced themselves they were performing an act of love by confronting my obvious lies and offering to rescue me from my inevitable financial collapse. We have researched several options to help you transition back to reality, my mother continued. There are debt consolidation programs, credit counseling services, and several job opportunities right here in Cleveland that would allow you to rebuild your life on solid ground instead of Manhattan fantasies. My sister Rebecca, who had remained quiet until this point, finally spoke. Sarah, I know this feels harsh, but we are worried about you. The longer you maintain these lies, the harder it will be to recover when everything falls apart. We want to help you before you hit rock bottom. I looked around this room at faces filled with pity and determination. They had spent months building this narrative about my failures, and now they were committed to saving me from problems I did not actually have. The frustration was overwhelming, but what came next was pure humiliation. My mother stood up and addressed the room like a town hall meeting. I think it is time for Sarah to tell us the truth about her real job, her real living situation, and her real financial circumstances. No more pretending, no more elaborate stories about promotions and success. Just honest truth so we can figure out how to help. The room fell silent, all eyes focused on me with expectation and judgment. They wanted a confession, an admission of failure that would validate their months of concern and intervention planning. They wanted me to break down, admit I was struggling, and accept their rescue plan. Instead, I felt something shift inside me. The frustration transformed into clarity. These people who claimed to love me had spent an entire year refusing to believe anything positive about my life. They had chosen to invent problems rather than celebrate successes. They had turned my achievements into evidence of deception and my happiness into proof of delusion. You want the truth? I asked, standing up and facing the room. The truth is that you all decided I was failing and then searched for evidence to support that decision. The truth is that you would rather believe I am a liar than believe I am successful. The truth is that this intervention says far more about your limitations than mine." The room erupted in voices talking over each other. My mother held up her hand for silence. "Sarah, deflection and anger are common responses when confronted with uncomfortable truths," she said. "We understand you are embarrassed, but denial will not solve your problems. We need specifics. What company do you work for? What is your exact job title? What is your actual salary? Prove to us that this elaborate lifestyle is legitimate." I was about to answer when something unexpected happened. My phone rang and the caller ID showed James Richardson, Morrison and Associates. My boss was calling on Easter Sunday, which was unusual, but not unheard of in our industry when dealing with urgent client situations. "I need to take this," I said, but my mother shook her head. "No more delays, no more distractions. This is exactly the kind of avoidance behavior we are talking about. You can call back whoever that was after we finish this conversation." But the phone kept ringing, and I knew James would only call on a holiday if it was truly important. Against my family's protests, I answered the call. "Sarah, I am sorry to bother you on Easter, but we have a situation," James said, his voice carrying the urgency that meant big client emergency. "Harrison Industries wants to move forward with the merger discussion we planned for next week. They want to meet tomorrow morning, and they specifically requested you to lead the presentation. Can you be back in the city tonight?" I glanced around the room of family members who were glaring at me with disapproval for taking the call during their intervention. "Yes, of course," I replied. "Send me the updated brief, and I will review everything on the train back." "Perfect. And Sarah, I know I have mentioned this before, but after this Harrison deal closes, we need to discuss your promotion timeline. The partners have been impressed with your client management skills, and there are some exciting opportunities opening up." The conversation continued for several more minutes, with James discussing client expectations, presentation details, and strategic approaches that clearly indicated a high-level professional relationship. When I finally hung up, the room was silent and the expressions on my family's faces had shifted from righteous certainty to confused uncertainty. But my mother was not ready to abandon her intervention plan. "Sarah, I do not know who that was, or what kind of elaborate performance you just put on, but this is exactly what we are talking about. Creating fictional work emergencies to avoid facing reality is a sign that this deception has gone too far." That was the moment everything changed. Because at that exact second, our doorbell rang, and my mother went to answer it, expecting perhaps a neighbor or late-arriving relative. Instead, she found herself face to face with James Richardson himself, standing on our front porch, in a tailored suit, holding a briefcase, and looking every inch the successful Manhattan executive that he was. The silence in our living room was deafening as my mother returned from the front door, followed by a man who looked like he had stepped out of a Fortune 500 boardroom. James Richardson stood 6 feet tall in an impeccably tailored charcoal suit, Italian leather shoes, and a presence that immediately commanded attention. His silver hair was perfectly styled, his handshake firm and confident, and everything about him radiated the kind of success my family had convinced themselves I was faking. "Mrs. Mitchell, I presume," James said, extending his hand to my mother, who looked like she had seen a ghost. "I am James Richardson's senior partner at Morrison and Associates. I was hoping to speak with Sarah about tomorrow's presentation, but I realize I may be interrupting a family gathering." The room full of relatives who had just spent 2 hours dissecting my supposed lies suddenly found themselves face to face with evidence that contradicted their entire narrative. My mother, who moments earlier had been demanding I confess to my fake career, now stood frozen, unable to process this development. "I apologize for the intrusion," James continued, clearly unaware of the intervention drama he had walked into. "Sarah, I tried calling you back, but it went straight to voicemail. Since I was driving through Cleveland on my way to visit my own family in Toledo, I thought I would stop by with the Harrison Industries brief in person. This merger could be career-defining for you." He opened his briefcase and pulled out a thick folder marked Confidential, Harrison Industries acquisition. The professional document's corporate letterhead and James's obvious authority created a surreal contrast with my family's basement-level intervention setup. My cousin Jennifer, who had been so confident in her observation log, now looked like she wanted to disappear. My uncle Robert, who had researched salary ranges to prove I was lying, stared at James with the recognition that he was looking at someone who probably earned more in a month than Robert made in a year. Sarah has been instrumental in securing this account. James told the room, apparently deciding to treat this as a normal social situation. Harrison Industries specifically requested her leadership on this project because of her innovative approach to their operational efficiency challenges. The preliminary numbers suggest we could save them upward of $75 million annually. My grandmother, who had lived through the Great Depression and claimed to recognize financial deception, now sat in stunned silence as this distinguished executive discussed my professional achievements with casual pride. "If you do not mind me saying," James addressed my mother directly, "you must be incredibly proud of Sarah's accomplishments. In my 30 years in corporate consulting, I have rarely seen someone advance so quickly while maintaining such strong client relationships. We are planning to promote her to vice president within the next 6 months, making her the youngest VP in our company's history." The manila folder in my mother's hands filled with her evidence of my deception suddenly seemed ridiculous and small. Her fact sheet about my impossible lifestyle now looked like the paranoid conspiracy theory it had always been. My Aunt Patricia, who had been so certain about my restaurant job theory, now found herself in conversation with a man who clearly moved in circles she had only read about in business magazines. When James mentioned that he had flown in from a client meeting in London last week, her theories about my fake sophistication crumbled into embarrassment. "Sarah, I hate to discuss business during family time," James continued, "but I wanted you to know that the Harrison deal could easily lead to partnership discussions. Your strategic thinking and client management skills have impressed not just our team, but senior executives at multiple Fortune 500 companies." He pulled out his phone and showed my mother a Forbes article about Morrison and Associates, pointing to a group photo that included me standing next to other senior executives at an industry conference. "This was from our recognition ceremony last month. Sarah received the Strategic Excellence Award for her work on the Pemberton Industries restructuring." The award James mentioned was something I had tried to tell my family about during our last phone call, but my mother had cut me off to lecture me about the importance of real accomplishments versus participation trophies. My sister Rebecca, who had been convinced I was living in denial, now looked at James with a mixture of awe and confusion. Her husband was a successful doctor, but even he did not carry himself with the kind of authority that James projected effortlessly. "Mrs. Mitchell," James said, turning back to my mother, "I hope you understand how valuable Sarah has become to our organization. We have been discussing succession planning, and her name consistently comes up for executive leadership roles. Companies like Goldman Sachs and McKinsey have tried to recruit her, but we are determined to keep her with our team." The mention of Goldman Sachs hit my Uncle Robert like a physical blow. He had spent the intervention explaining why my lifestyle was impossible on a consulting salary, but now he was hearing about recruitment attempts from investment banks that offered compensation packages he could not even conceptualize. My mother, who had orchestrated this entire intervention to force me to confess my failures, now found herself in the surreal position of having her daughter's boss elaborate on successes that exceeded even her highest hopes for my future. "I actually have Sarah's compensation analysis in here," James said, rifling through his briefcase. "We completed her annual review last month, and her performance metrics are exceptional across all categories." He pulled out an official-looking document with Morrison and Associates letterhead. While he did not show the specific numbers to my family, he held it in a way that made clear it was substantial and legitimate. "Sarah, your client satisfaction scores are consistently above 95%. Your project completion rate is perfect, and your revenue generation has exceeded targets by an average of 40% over the past 18 months. These numbers are why we are fast-tracking your promotion schedule." The room was so quiet I could hear my grandmother's antique clock ticking in the hallway. Every family member who had spent months convinced of my deception now faced the reality that not only was I telling the truth, but my actual success exceeded anything they had imagined possible. My cousin David, who had laughed about my fishy lifestyle claims, now looked like he was trying to solve a puzzle that had too many pieces. His own career as a middle manager at a regional insurance company suddenly seemed modest in comparison to what James was describing. I should probably let you get back to your family celebration, James said, checking his expensive watch. Sarah, can you meet me at the office tomorrow at 7 a.m.? Harrison Industries wants to finalize the preliminary agreement by Wednesday, which gives us a tight timeline but tremendous opportunity. As he prepared to leave, James shook hands with several family members, exchanging business cards and pleasantries that further cemented his obvious success and professional stature. When he handed my mother his business card, she stared at it like it was written in a foreign language. "It was wonderful meeting Sarah's family," he said, as my mother walked him to the door. "You have raised an exceptional daughter. Her work ethic, strategic thinking, and leadership skills are exactly what our industry needs. We consider ourselves fortunate to have her on our team." After James left, the living room remained silent for several minutes. The intervention materials scattered across coffee tables now looked like evidence of a different kind of delusion. My family's delusion about my failures rather than any delusion of my own about success. My mother returned to the living room holding James's business card, her face cycling through emotions I had never seen before. The confidence she had displayed during the intervention had evaporated, replaced by confusion, embarrassment, and dawning realization of how wrong they had all been. "That was your actual boss," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "He was talking about millions of dollars, and Fortune 500 companies, and Goldman Sachs recruitment." The manila folder slipped from her hands, scattering her fact sheets and evidence documents across the floor. Her carefully researched salary estimates and lifestyle calculations now looked like the amateur detective work of someone who had fundamentally misunderstood the situation she was investigating. My Aunt Patricia was the first to speak. "Sarah, I do not understand. If you really have this incredible job, why did not you just tell us? Why were you so secretive about everything?" The question hung in the air, and I realized this was the moment where I could either explain the confidentiality requirements that had prevented me from sharing details, or I could address the deeper issue of why they had been so determined to believe I was failing rather than succeeding. But before I could answer, my Uncle Robert stood up, his face red with embarrassment. "We owe you an apology, Sarah. We completely misunderstood your situation." My grandmother, who had been silent since James left, finally spoke. "Sarah, dear, I am so sorry. We thought we were helping you, but we were just making assumptions based on our own limited understanding of what success looks like." The intervention had become something entirely different, not a confrontation about my lies, but a revelation about their assumptions, their limitations, and their inability to recognize success that operated outside their familiar boundaries. But the story was far from over. Because as my family began processing their mistakes, I realized that this moment of vindication was just the beginning of a much larger reckoning that would expose not just their misjudgments about my career, but deeper truths about family dynamics, respect, and the consequences of choosing to believe the worst about someone you claim to love. The real drama was just getting started. The aftermath of James's visit should have been a moment of family reconciliation, but instead it became the catalyst for an even more devastating betrayal. As my relatives awkwardly apologized and tried to process their misconceptions, my sister Rebecca pulled me aside with what I initially thought would be a heartfelt apology. "Sarah, I need to talk to you privately," she said, leading me to our old childhood bedroom upstairs. "There are things you do not know about why everyone was so convinced you were lying." I followed her, expecting a sisterly heart-to-heart about family dynamics and misunderstandings. Instead, Rebecca closed the door and turned to face me with an expression I had never seen before, cold, calculating, and completely devoid of the guilt I expected after witnessing James's validation of my success. "Before you get too comfortable with your little victory down there," she began, her voice taking on a tone that made my skin crawl. You should know that this intervention was not really about concern for your welfare. It was about protecting our family's financial interests. I stared at her, confused. What are you talking about? Rebecca walked to our old shared dresser and pulled out a thick manila envelope from behind it. Do you remember when Grandpa died 3 years ago and left that trust fund? The one that was supposed to be divided equally among all the grandchildren when the youngest turned 30? I nodded slowly. Our grandfather had established a substantial trust fund, but the details had always been handled by family lawyers and never seemed immediately relevant since the youngest cousin would not turn 30 for several years. Well, there is a clause in that trust that you never knew about. Rebecca continued, opening the envelope to reveal legal documents. If any beneficiary is deemed financially irresponsible or unstable, their portion can be redistributed among the remaining beneficiaries. The family has to vote on whether someone qualifies as financially irresponsible. The blood drained from my face as I began to understand what she was telling me. Mom has been building a case for months that you are financially unstable and living beyond your means through credit card debt and deception, Rebecca explained with chilling matter-of-fact delivery. She has been documenting everything: your social media posts, your lifestyle claims, your refusal to provide detailed financial information to family. She convinced everyone that you were heading for bankruptcy and would eventually need to borrow against your trust fund portion, putting the entire fund at risk. I felt physically sick. So the intervention was not about helping me. It was about building evidence to steal my inheritance. Not steal, Rebecca corrected with a twisted smile. Protect. We were protecting family assets from someone who clearly could not manage money responsibly. At least that was the plan before your boss showed up and ruined everything. The documents in her hands included detailed financial projections, legal research about trust fund management, and what looked like a formal petition to declare me financially incompetent. My own family had spent months building a legal case to strip me of my inheritance based on fabricated evidence of financial instability. But why are you telling me this now? I asked, struggling to process the magnitude of their betrayal. James just proved that everything you believed about me was wrong. Rebecca's expression hardened further. Because now we have a different problem. Your success makes you a threat to the rest of us. That trust fund was supposed to help David start his business, pay for Patricia's daughter's college, and supplement Mom's retirement. If you take your full portion, there is less for everyone else. She pulled out additional documents that showed detailed calculations of how my trust fund portion could be redistributed among other family members. They had not just planned to declare me incompetent, they had already decided how to divide my money among themselves. So here is what is going to happen. Rebecca continued, her lawyer training evident in her calculated approach. You are going to voluntarily reduce your trust fund claim to 10% of the original amount. In exchange, we will not pursue the financial incompetency petition, and we will all pretend this intervention never happened. I stared at her in disbelief. Are you seriously trying to blackmail me into giving up my inheritance after everything that just happened downstairs? I am offering you a reasonable compromise, she replied coldly. Yes, we were wrong about your current financial situation, but that does not change the fact that you live in expensive New York, while the rest of us have local expenses and financial pressures you do not understand. You can afford to take less. The documents she showed me revealed the depth of their conspiracy. Multiple family members had signed affidavits claiming they had witnessed evidence of my financial instability. My Uncle Robert had prepared detailed cost of living analyses designed to prove my lifestyle was unsustainable. My Aunt Patricia had collected social media screenshots and annotated them with commentary about unrealistic spending patterns. Even Grandma signed off on this, I asked, looking at a document with her shaky signature. Grandma was worried about you, Rebecca said. She thought we were helping you by forcing you to face reality before you lost everything. She believed she was protecting your future financial security. The manipulation was breathtaking. They had convinced our elderly grandmother to participate in their scheme by framing it as protection rather than theft. They had turned genuine family concern into a tool for financial exploitation. You have until tomorrow morning to decide. Rebecca continued, checking her watch like this was a business negotiation rather than family extortion. Sign the voluntary reduction paperwork, or we file the incompetency petition, and make this a very public legal battle that will embarrass you professionally and personally. I realized that even my vindication with James's visit had been anticipated and planned for. Rebecca had backup strategies ready for multiple scenarios, including the possibility that my career success was real. You think you can threaten me into giving up money that rightfully belongs to me? I asked, my voice shaking with anger and disbelief. I think you will do the smart thing and avoid a family war that nobody wins, Rebecca replied. Besides, after taxes and legal fees, fighting us would cost you almost as much as just taking the reduced amount voluntarily. She walked toward the bedroom door, then paused and turned back. Oh, and Sarah, if you are thinking about telling anyone downstairs about this conversation, remember that it would be your word against all of ours. We have months of documented evidence about your secrecy and evasiveness regarding family financial discussions. Who do you think they will believe? As she reached for the door handle, Rebecca delivered her final blow. Your boss seemed very impressed with your strategic thinking. I hope you apply some of that intelligence to this situation and make the right choice for everyone involved. After she left, I sat alone in our childhood bedroom, surrounded by evidence of the most calculated betrayal I could have imagined. My family had not just misjudged my success, they had actively conspired to steal from me based on their misjudgments, and when proven wrong, they had immediately shifted to new schemes to achieve the same goal. The intervention had been theater. The concern had been performance. The apologies downstairs had been damage control. And my own sister, the one person I thought would ultimately support me regardless of family politics, had revealed herself as the architect of a conspiracy designed to rob me of my inheritance. But Rebecca had made one critical mistake in her calculated approach. She had assumed that my years in corporate consulting had not taught me anything about strategic thinking, evidence gathering, and the importance of documentation. She had underestimated exactly how thoroughly I understood the value of building an airtight case before making any moves. As I sat in that bedroom surrounded by evidence of their conspiracy, I realized that my real family revenge story was just beginning. They wanted to play strategic games with family finances and legal manipulation. They had chosen the wrong person to underestimate. I pulled out my phone and began documenting everything Rebecca had shown me, photographing every signature, every calculation, every piece of evidence they had assembled for their theft. But more importantly, I started planning my own strategy, one that would expose not just their current conspiracy, but everything else they had been hiding behind their facade of family concern. Because if there was one thing my corporate training had taught me, it was this: people who are willing to steal from family members usually have other secrets worth discovering. And I was about to become very good at uncovering family secrets. That night, I did not sleep. Instead, I applied every investigative skill I had learned in corporate consulting to unraveling the conspiracy my family had built against me. What I discovered over the next 12 hours would transform my understanding of family loyalty forever and provide me with weapons I never knew I needed. Starting with the legal documents Rebecca had shown me, I used my corporate law contacts to research the trust fund details she had referenced. What I learned was that my family had lied about more than just my financial situation. They had been systematically manipulating the trust fund structure for years. My first call was to Martin Weiss, a corporate attorney who had worked with Morrison and Associates on several complex financial cases. When I explained the situation, he immediately offered to review the trust documentation as a personal favor. Sarah, these incompetency petitions are serious legal instruments, Martin explained during our early morning phone call. If your family filed false documentation or misrepresented facts to support their case, they could face criminal fraud charges, not just civil liability. Martin's research revealed that the trust fund had actually increased in value significantly over the past 3 years, meaning the portions available to each beneficiary were much larger than my family had ever mentioned. More disturbing, the financial records showed several unusual transactions that suggested someone had been borrowing against the trust fund without proper authorization. There are withdrawal patterns here that do not match the trust terms, Martin explained. Someone with fiduciary access has been using fund assets for personal loans, presumably with the intention of repaying before distribution. But the repayment schedule does not align with the interest accumulation, which means the fund has been systematically depleted. While Martin analyzed the financial records, I contacted my Uncle Robert's insurance office, using skills I had learned from investigating corporate fraud cases. Pretending to be a potential client interested in comprehensive business insurance, I engaged his secretary in conversation about the company's financial health and recent business developments. "Oh, Mr. Mitchell has been working so hard lately," his secretary confided. "He has been dealing with some cash flow challenges, but he is optimistic about that big investment opportunity coming through soon. Something about family money that should help stabilize everything." The family money she referenced was clearly my trust fund portion, which meant Robert had been planning financial decisions based on money he intended to steal from me. Further investigation revealed that he had already secured business loans using projected trust fund income as collateral, putting both his business and the family trust at risk. But the most shocking discovery came when I researched my sister Rebecca's financial situation. Using my corporate network's access to public records and legal databases, I uncovered information that explained her sudden interest in manipulating trust fund distributions. Rebecca and her doctor husband had invested heavily in a luxury real estate development that had gone bankrupt 6 months earlier. They faced potential lawsuits from other investors and had outstanding debts that far exceeded what I had realized. Her law firm was also under investigation for billing irregularities on several major cases, which could result in professional sanctions and financial penalties. "Your sister is in serious financial trouble," Martin confirmed after reviewing the public records I had gathered. "The real estate investment alone put her underwater by at least $500,000, and the law firm investigation could result in additional liability. She needs money desperately, which explains why she has been so aggressive about manipulating the trust fund distribution." As I continued gathering evidence, a pattern emerged that was far more disturbing than simple greed. Multiple family members were facing financial pressures they had hidden from each other, and they had collectively decided that my portion of the trust fund was the solution to all their problems. My cousin David's business expansion had failed dramatically, leaving him with debt and lease obligations he could not meet. My Aunt Patricia's husband had been laid off from his manufacturing job and had been unemployed for 8 months. Even my grandmother had been struggling with medical expenses that were not fully covered by her insurance. What made their conspiracy particularly cruel was that they had convinced each other that I was the family member least deserving of financial support. My success in New York had been reframed as evidence that I did not need the trust fund money, while their hidden financial struggles had been positioned as proof that they deserved larger portions. But their biggest mistake was underestimating how thoroughly my corporate training had prepared me to investigate complex financial fraud. By Tuesday morning, I had assembled a comprehensive case file that included bank records, loan documents, legal filings, and recorded conversations that proved systematic conspiracy to commit trust fund fraud. My evidence gathering received an unexpected boost when James Richardson called to follow up on our Harrison Industries meeting preparation. "Sarah, I wanted you to know that yesterday's presentation went exceptionally well," he said. "Harrison Industries is moving forward with our full proposal, and they have specifically requested you as the primary account manager. This deal alone will probably accelerate your promotion timeline significantly." During our conversation, I mentioned that I was dealing with some family financial matters that might require legal consultation. "If you need references for trust and estate attorneys, I have excellent contacts," James offered. "Morrison and Associates works with some of the best financial crime investigators in the country. If someone is manipulating family trusts, these lawyers can uncover it quickly and ensure appropriate legal consequences. That afternoon, I received an unexpected call from my grandmother. Her voice sounded different, worried and confused in a way that immediately caught my attention. "Sarah, dear, I need to ask you something, and I want you to tell me the truth," she began. "Rebecca came to visit me this morning, and she said some things that do not make sense with what I saw yesterday when your boss visited." My grandmother explained that Rebecca had tried to convince her that James's visit was somehow staged or exaggerated, and that I was still hiding financial problems that would eventually affect the trust fund. "But Sarah, that man was clearly legitimate," my grandmother continued. "I have been around long enough to recognize genuine success when I see it. Why would Rebecca be trying so hard to convince me otherwise? And why did she ask me to sign additional papers about the trust fund without letting me read them carefully first?" This conversation revealed that Rebecca was continuing her manipulation campaign even after being proven wrong about my career success. She was attempting to isolate family members and convince them to support trust fund manipulation based on new false claims about my character and intentions. "Grandma, I think there are things about the family finances that you do not know," I said carefully. "Would you be willing to meet with an attorney who specializes in trust fund management? I think you deserve to understand exactly how your money has been handled and what some family members have been planning." My grandmother agreed immediately. "Sarah, I established that trust fund to help my grandchildren build good lives, not to create family conflicts or enable bad decisions by people who should know better." By Wednesday morning, I had assembled what Martin Weiss called the most comprehensive family financial fraud case he had seen in 15 years of practice. The evidence included documentation proving multiple family members had conspired to file false incompetency claims, bank records showing unauthorized borrowing against trust fund assets, email chains discussing strategies to manipulate trust fund distributions, recorded conversations where family members discussed hiding their own financial problems while exaggerating mine, legal contracts where family members had committed future trust fund money as collateral for personal debts. "Sarah, this is not just family drama," Martin explained. "This is criminal conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse regarding your grandmother's signature on documents she did not understand, and potential RICO violations if we can prove the conspiracy was ongoing and involved multiple fraudulent acts." But the most powerful evidence came from an unexpected source. My grandmother had kept detailed records of every family conversation about the trust fund, including notes about who had told her what and when. Her documentation revealed a clear pattern of manipulation and false information designed to convince her to support actions that were not in her best interests. "Your grandmother is a smart woman who kept better records than most corporate accounting departments," Martin observed. "These notes prove that your family systematically lied to her about your financial situation, pressured her to sign documents without proper explanation, and manipulated her genuine concern for your welfare to support their theft scheme." As I prepared to confront my family with this evidence, I realized that Rebecca had been right about one thing. This would definitely be a strategic battle. But she had made the classic mistake of underestimating her opponent and overestimating her own capabilities. My family wanted to play legal games with trust fund manipulation. They were about to discover exactly why Fortune 500 companies hired me to solve complex financial problems, and why Morrison and Associates was promoting me to vice president. The intervention they had planned to destroy me was about to become the catalyst for exposing every secret they had been hiding and every crime they had been planning. And this time I would have all the evidence I needed to ensure that justice was not just served, but served with the kind of precision that would make my corporate clients proud. Thursday morning arrived with the weight of reckoning. I had called a family meeting, ostensibly to discuss Rebecca's compromise proposal about the trust fund. What they did not know was that Martin Weiss would be joining us along with Detective Sarah Williams from the Financial Crimes Unit and my grandmother, who had insisted on being present when the truth finally came out. The same living room where they had staged their intervention just days earlier now became the setting for their exposure and downfall. As family members filed in expecting to pressure me into surrendering my inheritance, they instead found themselves facing a table covered with legal documents, bank records, and evidence of their systematic fraud. My mother was the first to notice the strangers in the room. "Sarah, who are these people, and why do we need them for a family financial discussion?" "Mom, I would like you to meet Martin Weiss, my attorney, and Detective Williams from the Cleveland Financial Crimes Unit," I announced. "They are here because what you all planned was not a family financial discussion, it was conspiracy to commit fraud." The color drained from Rebecca's face as she recognized the severity of what was happening. "Sarah, there is no need to involve outsiders in family matters. We can work this out ourselves." Detective Williams stepped forward with her badge visible. "Actually, ma'am, when family matters involve elder abuse, trust fund fraud, and criminal conspiracy, they become police matters. Please have a seat so we can discuss the evidence we have gathered." Martin opened the first folder and began laying out documents systematically. "Over the past week, we have documented extensive criminal activity involving multiple members of this family. The evidence includes fraud, elder abuse, conspiracy to commit theft, and filing false legal documents." He placed the first set of documents in front of my mother. "Mrs. Mitchell, these are bank records showing that you have been borrowing against the trust fund assets without proper authorization. You have taken approximately $47,000 over the past 18 months using forged documentation that claimed emergency family expenses." My mother's hands shook as she stared at the bank records that proved her theft. Those were loans, not theft. I was planning to pay everything back before the trust fund was distributed. "Unfortunately," Martin continued, "unauthorized borrowing from trust funds constitutes embezzlement regardless of repayment intentions, but that is not the most serious charge you are facing." He turned to Rebecca, placing a thick folder in front of her. "Ms. Mitchell Harrison, you have been manipulating legal documents, pressuring elderly family members to sign papers they did not understand, and conspiracy to file false incompetency claims. These are felony charges that could result in disbarment and significant prison time." Rebecca's lawyer training kicked in as she recognized the legal jeopardy she was facing. "We need to discuss this with legal representation present. I am not saying anything else without an attorney." "That is your right," Detective Williams acknowledged. "But the evidence is comprehensive enough that your cooperation is not required to proceed with charges." Martin continued around the room, documenting each family member's role in the conspiracy. Uncle Robert had used projected trust fund income to secure fraudulent business loans. Aunt Patricia had signed false affidavits about my financial instability. Even Cousin David had participated by providing fabricated evidence of my supposed debt problems. "The most serious charges involve elder abuse," Martin explained, turning to address the room. "Multiple family members manipulated an elderly woman, pressured her to sign documents without proper explanation, and systematically lied to her about family financial situations to support a theft scheme." My grandmother, who had been silent until this point, finally spoke with a voice that carried decades of authority and disappointment. "I am 87 years old, and I have seen family members make mistakes, but I have never seen anything as calculated and cruel as what you all planned." She stood up and addressed the room with the kind of moral clarity that comes from a lifetime of experience. "You convinced me that Sarah was struggling and needed intervention. You made me believe that signing papers was protecting her future financial security. But you were really stealing from her and using my concern as a weapon." And the shame on my family members' faces was palpable as they realized their elderly matriarch understood exactly how they had manipulated her love and concern for their criminal purposes. "Detective Williams," my grandmother continued, "I want to press charges for elder abuse. These people took advantage of my age and my trust to support theft and fraud. They do not deserve protection from the consequences of their actions." Detective Williams nodded and began reading the formal charges. "Based on the evidence assembled, we are prepared to file charges of conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, embezzlement, filing false legal documents, and organized theft against multiple members of this family. The room erupted in protest denials and desperate attempts to minimize their actions. My mother claimed she never intended to hurt anyone. Rebecca insisted that her legal research about trust fund management was not criminal conspiracy. Uncle Robert argued that his business loans were separate from family financial matters, but Martin had anticipated every defense and had evidence to counter every claim. The case was airtight, professionally assembled, and impossible to dispute. However, Detective Williams continued, the primary victim has requested an opportunity to address the family before we proceed with arrests. I stood up and looked around the room at people who had claimed to love me while systematically plotting to steal from me. The intervention had revealed not just their misconceptions about my success, but their fundamental willingness to betray family members for financial gain. For months, you all convinced yourselves that I was the family member who could not be trusted with money, I began. You built elaborate theories about my character flaws and financial instability. You staged an intervention to humiliate me into confessing failures that existed only in your imagination. I paused and let the silence emphasize the weight of what they had done. But while you were worried about my fake financial problems, you were all hiding real financial problems of your own. While you were judging my character, you were planning to steal from me. While you were claiming to act out of love and concern, you were conspiring to commit crimes that would have destroyed my financial future. Rebecca tried to interrupt, but Detective Williams gestured for silence. The most heartbreaking part, I continued, is that if any of you had simply told me about your financial struggles, I would have helped. My success that you refused to believe in, it could have been shared with family members who were honest about their needs. I pulled out a folder containing financial documents that Martin had prepared. My promotion to vice president comes with a compensation package that would have allowed me to help with David's business problems, Patricia's unemployment situation, Robert's cash flow issues, and Rebecca's real estate disaster. I could have helped everyone without anyone needing to steal from the trust fund. The room fell silent as they realized that their greed and deception had cost them not just legal consequences, but also the genuine help I would have provided if they had approached me honestly. But instead, you chose deception, manipulation, and theft. You chose to see me as an obstacle to your financial goals rather than as family who would support you through difficulties. My grandmother stood up again and walked to where I was standing. Sarah, what they did to you was unforgivable, but what they did to our family is even worse. They turned love into manipulation and concern into criminal conspiracy. She turned to face the rest of the family. I am changing my will to reflect what I have learned about your character. Sarah will receive my entire estate and the trust fund will be restructured to ensure that none of you benefit from your criminal behavior. The finality of her statement hit the room like a physical blow. Not only were they facing criminal charges, but their theft scheme had cost them their entire inheritance. Detective Williams began the arrest process, reading rights and explaining the charges each family member would face. As they were processed for booking, I felt a complex mixture of vindication, sadness, and relief. The intervention they had planned to destroy my confidence had instead exposed their true character and protected me from years of ongoing financial manipulation. Their attempt to steal my inheritance had resulted in them losing their own inheritance and facing criminal consequences that would follow them for years. 6 months later, I was sitting in my new corner office at Morrison & Associates, having been promoted to vice president ahead of schedule. The Harrison Industries deal had been wildly successful, leading to additional major accounts and recognition throughout the consulting industry. My grandmother and I had developed a closer relationship than ever before, bonding over weekly dinners where she shared stories about building financial security during the Depression, and I shared insights from my corporate projects. She had restructured her entire estate to support financial literacy programs and family counseling services, turning her disappointment with her children into positive community impact. Most of my family members had pled guilty to various charges and were serving community service sentences while paying restitution to the trust fund. Rebecca had lost her law license and was working as a paralegal while trying to rebuild her career and reputation. The family home had been sold to pay legal fees and restitution amounts. I had established a small foundation using part of my inheritance to help families navigate financial difficulties without resorting to manipulation or fraud. The foundation offered financial counseling, legal assistance, and emergency support for families dealing with hidden financial problems. But the most meaningful change was the new family I had built. James Richardson had become not just a mentor, but a genuine friend who understood the importance of chosen family over biological family. My colleagues at Morrison and Associates had rallied around me during the legal proceedings, providing support and friendship that felt more genuine than anything I had experienced with my relatives. I had also reconnected with childhood friends who had been successful in their own fields and understood the challenges of building careers while managing family expectations. We formed a tight group that celebrated each other's successes instead of plotting to tear each other down. The intervention that was supposed to humble me had instead revealed my strength. The family that was supposed to love me had shown their true character. And the success they refused to believe in had become the foundation for a life filled with people who genuinely supported and respected my achievements. Looking back on this whole experience, I have learned that sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones most willing to betray you when money is involved. But I have also learned that real family is not about blood relationships. It is about people who celebrate your successes instead of plotting against them. Have you ever had family members turn against you when you became successful, or maybe you have seen how money can reveal people's true character? I would love to hear your stories in the comments below. If this story resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life family drama stories. Share this with anyone who needs to hear that sometimes the best revenge is simply living well and surrounding yourself with people who actually want you to succeed. Thank you for following my journey from family betrayal to finding my true chosen family. Remember, success is not just about what you achieve professionally. It is about building a life surrounded by people who genuinely want the best for you. Take care of yourselves, and I will see you in the next story.